The Dreaded Doughnut Dropper by Xtrole. Note, this is just a casual reading, and so there may be reading errors that happen. Once upon a time, there was a teacher who told a student named Keg that he had to write a story for class, and Keg was like, "No way, Teach, I don't know how to even write stories." The teacher patiently explained to Keg that he needed to figure it out, or else he'd be failing the class. Keg was devastated, and he headed out of the classroom, but he thought that he saw something funny through a mirror as he left the class, because it seemed like he had just seen a bear in the mirror. "Professor Bear?" he said. "Is there a real bear in there? Sounds like you've got quite the imagination," said his teacher's voice about 10 seconds after he'd asked the question. "And no, there's no bear in here. You'd better get to writing now." Keg shrugged, and he exited the building. Then, as he was heading home, he decided that he should do his story about a professor who was actually a bear and ate the students. That would be great. And so he penned a story about a professor who could turn back and forth between a bear and a human and would eat his students. And the next day he proudly turned the story in to the teacher. The day after that, the teacher informed him that his story was really good, but that it felt a bit like it was too influenced by taking the name Professor Bear and making it into an actual evil character who killed students. "Well, there was that student of yours who went missing last year," Keg joked, "but then he saw Professor Bear turn into a real bear, and the bear dragged him out of the classroom's back door and into the woods." "I knew it!" Keg cried, as the professor dragged him helplessly along. "I knew that I'd seen a bear. You were just gaslighting me when you denied it." Then the two of them soon reached a tree that turned out to be a secret door to Professor Bear's underground lair, and Keg suddenly saw a man with a smirk on his face begin throwing donuts at him. One of the donuts landed near his mouth, and he managed to move his mouth so that he could take a bite, and the donut tasted pretty good, but the donuts just kept on coming, and soon he was completely covered in them, and they were sticking him in place somehow. "Hey, Bear," the man greeted the professor. "I continue to be glad that I've allowed you to go back to teaching. You haven't been killing any students, right?" "Nope," said Bear with a sigh. "I've sworn off ever eating any students again, and I am a bear of my word." "Very good," said the man, and then he turned to me and added, "Do you know who I am, son?" "Not my dad, that's for sure," I said uncertainly, and the man snickered and said, "Good one, kid. Nope, I ain't your pops, but if you ever want to see your pops again, then you're gonna want to do as you're told, you hear?" "Blah, blah, blah," I said, and Bear added to the man that his dad and him aren't friends at the moment. Neither are he and his mom, actually, and so neither of them are really going to be good motivators for this one. "Hey," Keg said indignantly, "I wrote that in one essay with the expectation that it'd remain private. Whatever happened to teacher-student confidentiality?" Bear shrugged and said, I say what I want when I want, and then got a nervous look on his face and added, as long as the dreaded doughnut dropper here approves, of course. So that's what this freak calls himself? Keg said with a laugh. What's his deal anyway? I mean, he's not letting you kill people anymore, so that suggests that he's kinda heroic, but he also keeps innocent students captive, and that suggests that he's a villain. I suppose that you could say that sometimes I'm a hero, and sometimes I'm a villain, the dreaded doughnut dropper explained. Depends on what mood I'm in, I guess. So what's in store for me then? Keg asked as he moved his mouth to take another bite of a donut. Why, you'll be making donuts, of course, the dreaded doughnut dropper said gleefully. You and our other recruit, Ice. Wait, Ice is here. I knew it. I knew that it was you who took her, Bear. You didn't know that until just a little while ago, Bear reasoned, because when you made that accusation, it was framed as a joke. That's true, Keg admitted, and then Bear and the dreaded doughnut dropper carried him over to another room where he saw Ice making donuts. Oh no, they've taken another student hostage now, she groaned, and the dreaded doughnut dropper said, That's right, and then he removed all of the donuts that were stuck to Keg and said, Teach him how to make some donuts, will ya? And then he and Bear left the room and locked the door while laughing uproariously. Before we begin, I said, I'm sorry that you got dragged into this, and we will never become lovers, because my boyfriend is still out there, and Bear has let me know that he's still waiting for me to return. Fact check true, Keg agreed. He's told me that he's not gonna date anybody else unless he finds out for sure what happened to you, and I wouldn't be a bad bro and shack up with his girl anyway. I ain't like that. You say that now, I said, but we're probably going to be tempted if it's just you and I for a while here at the same time, and so we need to both remain committed to our principles and not let any moments of weakness screw things up between me and Shot, all right? Absolutely, Keg agreed. We wouldn't be able to live with ourselves if we did something like that, and Shot would never forgive us. Shot ain't like that, I said dismissively, but it would be a horrible betrayal nonetheless, and I don't want to be a bad girlfriend, and you don't want to be a bad friend. I don't know, Keg said with a frown. I mean, he never forgave Cher when she cheated on him back in the day, right? He forgave her, I said. It just took a while, and now he's a firm believer in forgiveness and would forgive us faster. But we're not going to do anything, and so there won't be anything to forgive, fortunately. That makes sense, Keg agreed. I mean, I did cheat on my last girlfriend, but I've learned my lesson now and wouldn't give in to temptation again. Oh no, I said worriedly. What happened? Calm down, Keg said dismissively. It only happened because I was drunk, and I've sworn off booze now, and I wouldn't cheat on someone if I wasn't drunk. Well, there you go then, I said. no booze for you. And then she began teaching Keg how to make donuts. As they made donuts, Ice asked, "So what does everyone think happened to me?" "Well," Keg answered, "different people think different things. Some say that you ran off. Some say you were kidnapped. Some say that you were murdered. And yeah, I think those are mostly the theories. Most people don't think that they'll ever see you again. Even Shot doesn't seem particularly hopeful, but he has enough hope that he keeps on telling people who tell him to get laid to F off." "Fair enough," I said, and she and Keg continued making donuts until the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper popped in and said, "Let's see how you're doing," and tried a donut and looked pretty pleased about how it tasted. "Good job," he said, and then he added that "I'm really bummed to do this, but I'm gonna have to wipe your memories of everything that's happened since a bit before Bear revealed that he's a human-bear hybrid to you and return you to home. Some people have been getting suspicious of Professor Bear because Keg was last seen near his classroom, and so if you two return and don't point any fingers at Bear, then the suspicion will go away." Then he threw some donuts at them, and the donuts caused them to pass out and also erase the memories that he wanted erased, and he transported them away from his lair. Ice and Keg eventually woke up in an open field in the middle of the night, and Keg saw Ice and said, "Oh wow, you're back. Shot is gonna be so happy." "Back?" Ice said in confusion. "Well, what are you talking about? And why are we in this field in the middle of the night?" "You've been missing since last year," Keg said, and Ice replied by looking annoyed and saying, No. The last thing that I remember was waking up to go to class, and that's weird. Why would my last memory be of me waking up and getting ready for class?" "Come to think of it," Keg said with a frown, "my last memory was waking up and getting ready for class too. This is weird." And so the two of them headed into town and checked a calendar, and the date said that it was about 100 years later than when they'd last woken up. "Not good," I said, and Keg said, "Not good for you, because you've got a great boyfriend, but I don't have anything tying me down, and so this might be right up my alley." "Okay, Captain Empathy," Ice raged, "if you weren't a freaking sociopath, then you'd feel sad for me. And if you weren't a sociopath, then you'd be happy for me," Keg reasoned, and Ice angrily said, "But this means that Shot will not get his girlfriend back, and so that's 2 sad people versus just 1 happy you." "Huh," Keg said thoughtfully. "I guess when you put it like that, then maybe I should have some empathy. But shouldn't you still have 50% of the empathy for me that I have for you two?" "Fine," I said while throwing her hands up in the air dramatically. "I can get how you might feel better off in this time zone." "Much appreciated," Keg said thankfully, "and I can totally see how you and Shot are very disadvantaged by this. I wonder if there's some way for you to be able to transport back in time and for me to stay here. I mean, if we could go forward in time, then you could probably go back, right? That makes sense, Ice agreed. Maybe we should ask some people if they know anything about time travel. We don't want to seem crazy, though, Keg said, and so we should probably try to do some research first to see if time travel is actually a thing that anyone thinks is real. I mean, we didn't think that time travel was real until 2 seconds ago. Good point, Ice agreed. Let's find where a library is at, wait until it opens, and then begin researching. And so they looked around for a library and eventually found it, and it turned out that it was open 24/7. The bad news was that it turned out that the only books that were in the library were donut making books. WTF, I said as she opened up another book and found only donut making details inside of it. I know, right? Keg murmured in bewilderment. Why in the world do these people care about making donuts so much? A librarian heard what they were saying, and she walked over to them and said, "Hi, I'm Paige. You two must be new around here, so I'll explain the answer to y'all. We receive all of the supplies that we need in this city if we simply make enough donuts. It's the only payment that's accepted." "Why do they want so many donuts, though?" Ice asked, and Paige shrugged and said, "Beats me. But making donuts is how we pay our bills, and so we continue doing it. 98% of the jobs in this city are donut making jobs. We think that we came here from another time period," Keg blurted out, and Paige laughed and said, "That happens a lot. I hope that y'all didn't leave too many close relationships behind, because chances are pretty high that you won't be leaving here. We can't get past the big wall." I didn't leave any super close relationships behind, but Ice here did, and we should try to have empathy for her, I think, Keg explained, and Ice said, "Thanks for remembering the empathy part, and yeah, this is gonna be a much tougher transition for me than it will be for Keg if we are really trapped here. Do you know how we got here? The last memories that we have are of us waking up and getting ready for class. Is that normal?" "That's a fairly common last memory to have before getting here," Paige said with a nod, "though not everyone has that last memory. For example, my last memory before ending up here was of me heading towards my cheating boyfriend's house to set it on fire." "Yikes," Keg said trepidatiously. "We don't have to worry about that, do we?" "Not unless you're cheaters," Paige said with a shrug, and Keg said, "I cheated one time, but it was only because I was drunk," and then he seemed to realize that maybe he shouldn't have said anything, and Paige suddenly pulled a match out of one of her pockets and some gasoline out of another pocket, and then quickly got a blazing fire going and said, "Time to finish this once and for all," and Ice grabbed the shocked Keg by the hand and they raced for the exit. Paige seemed to realize that she didn't want to die either, and so she followed them to the exit, and all three were safely out of the library before it burned to the ground completely. Does this mean that you've gotten that out of your system now? Ice asked wearily, and Paige nodded and said, I think so. Now I feel kinda guilty about having burnt down the library, and so I think I can relate to the guilt that a cheater must feel. That's deep, Keg said in an impressed tone of voice, and yeah, I'll always feel guilty that I cheated. The alcohol helped make it happen, but I still have no excuse. I ain't drinking ever again either, just to be safe. Then a man came up to them and said, Time to pay for burning down that library. Ma ha 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 ha. And he began hurling donuts that seemed to be coming out of nowhere at the three of them. I can't move, I said, and Keg said, Me neither. Though, this donut sure tastes good though. And Paige said, So this is what all of the donuts we bake are used for? It sure is, the man said through bouts of diabolical laughter, though I don't actually need y'all's donuts since I can generate them naturally. Still fun to have you make 'em though. The donuts continued to cover Paige, Keg, and Ice until the three of them were so covered in them that they couldn't be seen from the outside, and they couldn't see anything but the donuts either. Is there a point to all of this? Ice raged, and Keg added that it was only Paige who burned down the library. Why are we in trouble? You're a cheater, the man reasoned, to which Keg responded that Ice ain't a cheater or an arsonist, though. What did she do? She must have done something, the man reasoned. Nobody's perfect. And Paige asked, Is he right? Did you do anything, Ice? I said uncertainly. There was one night where my parents told me to say my prayers, but I wanted to read comic books, and so I didn't say my prayers. And the man said, Ha, I knew it. Shoulda said your prayers. And he continued hurling donuts at the three of them, even though they were already so covered in donuts that it was purely just for fun at this point. What about you? Paige asked. Don't you need to pay for your transgressions? And the man began laughing even harder and said, I'm part hero and part villain, and so I just kinda do what I want. After a few more hours of the man hurling donuts at them, it was starting to get light, and so they heard him say, Farewell, I leave it to the others to remove the donuts. And then they heard footprints that quickly grew more and more quiet because he was running away. Soon they heard someone say, What happened to the library? And why is there a mountain of donuts here? And Paige explained everything that had happened, and then the guy said, That makes sense, especially because I just found this note that says, The Dreaded Doughnut Dropper was here. Can you get these donuts off of us? Keg asked. We can't move. There seems to be instructions for removing the donuts on the back of this note, the guy said, and then he followed the instructions, and they were all soon free from the donuts. Bummer that the library's burnt down, the man mourned. Should we begin rebuilding it? The others all agreed that that would be best, and so the four of them began to rebuild the library. Others in the town helped them rebuild the library, and eventually it was all built back, but the books were still all gone. And so, lots of people had to write new books for the library, and everyone had to be very careful to make sure that most of the books were about donut making, or else they feared that the dreaded doughnut dropper might get displeased that they weren't focusing enough on donut making. After a while, there were a fair amount of books in the library that had been written, and then Keg and Ice saw Professor Bear approaching them in the library. Professor Bear, Ice greeted him in surprise. Do you know how to get back home? And he suddenly turned into an actual bear and looked like he wanted to gobble them up. Ah! Keg and Ice screamed, and everyone else in the library moved away from where they were so that they wouldn't get eaten. Well, everyone except for Paige moved away anyway. She stayed put and drew a sword. I never thought that I'd defend a cheater, she said, but after becoming an arsonist, I'm not even sure if I have any moral high ground over cheaters anymore. Don't eat my friends, or I'll have to stab you. Then Professor Bear turned back into human form and said, Your bravery is commendable, Paige, and I'm glad to see that you've learned valuable lessons about forgiveness, common humanity, and standing up for what you believe in. I will now present you with this medal. He then withdrew a fancy-looking medal from his pocket and handed it to Paige, and she solemnly accepted the medal and wore it with pride. Do we have to worry about you trying to gobble us up, though, Professor Bear? Ice asked suspiciously, and Bear responded that the dreaded doughnut dropper doesn't allow me to gobble anybody up, and so I can't. If he ever changes his mind, though, then yes, you'll have to worry about me gobbling y'all up. Anywho, it's been good catching up with everyone, and I'll see you later. And Bear departed from the library, and everyone just let him go without following because they didn't want to risk him ignoring the dreaded doughnut dropper's orders and gobbling them up. Wow, said Keg, it's hard to believe that Professor Bear is a real bear. And Ice nodded and added that he did like to talk about eating meat during his classes sometimes, but I always figured that he was just a big fan of eating non-human meat, and that's why I only eat vegetarian food, Paige declared, because if someone's willing to eat one kind of meat, then they're more likely to be willing to eat any kind of meat. I don't know, I said doubtfully. I mean, most people I've known in my life eat meat, but none of them ate human meat, except for your professor, it seems, Paige declared, and who knows who else may have also been doing it. Paige said uncertainly. You never did that, did you, Keg? And Keg quickly said, No way. I don't want to end up with some disease from doing that. No way. So you're not saying that you wouldn't do it because of moral reasons? Paige asked suspiciously, just to not get a disease. The moral reasons too, of course, Keg said defensively. I never said that fear of disease was the only reason. Cut me some slack here, won't ya? Also, I said approvingly, Bear turns out to be able to morph into a bear, and so if he eats a human while in bear form, is that actually cannibalism? Ah, Paige said thoughtfully, maybe it's 50% cannibalism? What if he can morph into 100 different kinds of creatures? Keg reasoned. Would it be only 1% cannibalism if that were the case? That makes sense, Paige agreed, and Ice nodded and said, we'll have to ask him next time we see him. I mean, maybe he can morph into 1,000 different kinds of creatures, which would make it only 0.1% cannibalism. That'd still be bad, though, wouldn't it? Keg asked with a frown. I mean, even if it's only like 0.001% cannibalism, that'd still be bad, right? Definitely, Paige agreed, which is why I only eat vegetables. But what if he can morph into vegetables too? Ice reasoned. Then wouldn't it be partial cannibalism for him to eat vegetables too? In that case, Keg said with a grin, maybe all he should eat is donuts. And he, Ice, and Paige all laughed at his funny joke. Then Professor Bear returned into the library, and the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper was with him. We've decided that y'all have been so well behaved that you can return home if you like, the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper said gravely, but I saw a hint of a smirk on his face and said, are you pulling my leg? Please, don't tease me with the possibility of returning and then say, ha ha, just kidding, here's some donuts. Well, that was what I'd been planning on doing, the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper admitted, but since you spoiled it by figuring out my plan, I guess you can return home to your boyfriend. Care to say goodbyes to your friends first? Sure, I said gratefully. Farewell, but the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper cut her off by laughing diabolically and beginning to throw donuts at everyone. None of you will ever be leaving this city, he gloated, though perhaps I'll bring your boyfriend here before long, because I really am a hopeless romantic at heart. Mwah ha 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 ha. I'm not sure how I feel about that, I said uncertainly, as donuts that the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper was throwing covered her and her friends completely. I mean, it'd be great to be with him again, but what would he prefer? Doesn't matter what he prefers or what you prefer, the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper crowed. All that matters is what I prefer, because I'm the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper, and I'm the one calling the shots. Mwah ha 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 ha. You just did a punny, Keg noted, as the donuts that the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper was throwing continued to cover him and his friends. I mean, you said that you're the one calling the shots, and Ice's boyfriend is named Shot. A perfect pun. He said it with the S, though, Paige reasoned, which means that it wasn't exactly a perfect pun. Or maybe it was, the Dreaded Doughnut Dropper said smugly, because I can just snag 2 people who are named Shot, so that it'll be Shots. And then he and Bear left the library and came back later that day with 2 dudes, and one of them was Ice's boyfriend, and the other one was another random dude who was also named Shot. Shot! Ice cried out joyfully. Ice! Shot cried out joyfully, and the 2 of them ran into each other's arms and shared a warm embrace in a quick kiss that was enjoyable enough for them to be satisfied by it, but light enough that nobody started groaning that they needed to get a room. I am able to perform weddings since I'm a pastor, the other Shot offered, and Ice and Shot both agreed that this was a good idea, and so a wedding took place right there in the library, and the two of them were now officially married, and everyone was very happy for them, but also most of them still hoped that they'd somehow manage to escape from the dreaded Doughnut Dropper's clutches someday. The end.